Today I want to talk to you about coming out of the darkness. Church family, I believe that we have an epidemic going on in this world right now. An epidemic so great that many of us deal with it in secrecy because there's such a stigma attached to it. It's an epidemic that is impacting the way in which we connect to people, and not only impacts us personally, but impacts our family members. It's an epidemic so great that it impacts God's purpose for our life. And many people may not even be aware that they are suffering from this epidemic. What is this epidemic that's grasping at the throat of every one of us in our society today? It is depression. It's depression. Listen to the definition of depression. It is a mood disorder that is characterized by chronic and persistent sadness and a lack of interest. In other words, it's every day I can feel sad, I can feel depressed, I can feel isolated, I can feel like I'm away from people, that people may not be able to relate to what I'm going through. And for many of us, we are dealing with that. But let me just kind of give you some statistics that can kind of make this even more apparent. 1 in 5 of us in this church right now may not want to raise their hand to this because of the stigma that's attached to it, but 1 in 5 are dealing with depression right now. Diagnosed depression. There's another 10 to 15% of people who don't want to admit that they are depressed because of the stigma that's attached to it. It is one of the during the first month of COVID, phone calls to the mental health hotline increased by 300%. One of the largest areas of death amongst our children between the ages of 16 and 25 is in part due to depression. It is an epidemic that is impacting all of us. But let me give you some names of some people that may make it a little bit more relatable. Let's put some faces to these numbers. You all know Michael Phelps, the great Olympian, deals with chronic depression. Or how about people like that maybe some of you may enjoy, like Lady Gaga, someone who deals with chronic depression, or The Rock deals with chronic depression, but maybe you need to go back a little bit more in history. One of the greatest presidents of our nation, Abraham Lincoln, spoke and dealt chronically with depression. In fact, he wrote this one time. He said that if the world could experience the darkness that I am going through depression, that no one in this world would ever be cheerful. And we hail him as one of the greatest presidents of all time. But let's go back even further. I love in our Bible how Christ has all these unique people, these saints of our church that write these letters, but they were not perfect people. They were people that also had their own set of struggles, their own worries, their own anxieties, and yes, they too were depressed. I'm going to talk about the prophet Elijah next week, but just today, we'll just talk about someone that we are going to begin celebrating tomorrow, and that is St. Paul. Tomorrow we begin what is called the Apostles' Fast. There are 4 major fasting seasons throughout the calendar year in the Orthodox Church. You all know Great Lent. You all know the August 1st through the 15th for the Virgin Mary. You know Advent that always begins on November 15th and goes to December 25th. But you may not be aware of what we call the Apostles' Fast. It starts tomorrow. And it is a season of fasting, of prayer and fasting to honor and to celebrate and to live more like people like St. Peter and Paul. Listen to how St. Paul talks about his own struggles in his own life. If you're tuning in online, we encourage you, we're looking at the book, 2 Corinthians, chapter 1, verses 8. And we're on page 239 of our Bible if you want to open it up and read it with me. I always believe that in the Orthodox Church, we never just like to throw out Bible verses. Some churches like to do, they just kind of throw out Bible verses without really having the context of why it's being written in that way. Paul is writing to people, a city in Greece. He's writing to a people because he is struggling with how they have been treating him. Not just for a couple of days or a couple of weeks, but he's being constantly bombarded by people who he once thought were his friends and family, people that he thought were close to him. Listen to what he says. This is chapter 1, verses 8. He says, "We want to remind you, brothers and sisters, of the trouble we have had in the province of Asia. The burdens that have been laid upon us were so great and so heavy that we gave up hope. Now let's just remind everyone a little bit about this. This is the same St. Paul who heard the voice of Christ. This is the same St. Paul that saw miracles take place. This is the same St. Paul that would write so many of the words that we hear about in the Bible, that I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Yet he's telling you in this moment right now, and in one translation, it says, I was at the point of despair because of what was happening to me. And I think God allowed that sentence, that verse 1 to 8, to remind all of us that it's okay. It's okay to not be okay. And I just want to give all of you a word of encouragement today, that God doesn't want you to contain those dark days that you can experience. He doesn't want you to contain it. He wants you to give it to him. He doesn't want you to fake it to make it in this world. He wants you to give it to him so that he can take it from you in this world. And so part 1 of this sermon series, I want to give you 4 things that we are not doing well that lead to depression. If you want to write these down, you are more than welcome to. If not, I definitely would go back. These are just some of the items that we are not doing that are leading to one of the leading factors of suicide in this world right now. Many of you may not even know this, that every 11 minutes, someone commits suicide. Those of you that are in the field and the veterans or military members, 20 of our military and our veterans die every single day. One of the reasons is depression. So let me give you 4 things that we are not doing that we should be doing. Here's number 1. We are not listening to the right voice. One of the main reasons why we get depressed is because we're constantly listening to our voice. You see, you and I, we have a narrative that's kind of constantly going on in our own minds. We're constantly telling ourselves things over and over again. Constantly telling us sometimes things, if you're young, I don't measure up. I don't look as good. I'm too fat, too small, too skinny. Maybe some of you that are older, that are dealing with struggles in your life, maybe some of the negative thoughts come to your mind are, wow, we just buried another one of my family members, another one of my friends. Maybe I'm the next one up. Maybe you're dealing with the thoughts of that you don't measure up. But all of us have these negative narratives that run in our mind. And for many of us, what we don't realize is that our life follows what we are thinking. I heard someone put it like this: 95% of your emotional health comes from what you've been thinking about. It's not what's actually happening to you, it's actually what you've been thinking about. Let me ask you, what have you been thinking about? Have you ever took time to simply write down, what have I been thinking about all day today? Because if it's shaping my life, I better take inventory of it. If you ever take some time today maybe, or tomorrow, you should Google what we call ruminating animals. Ruminating animals are animals that are like sheep, giraffe, goats. And how they eat is quite interesting. They basically will take some hay and they start chewing on it. And I'm not going to impersonate all that, but they just simply start chewing on that hay. And they start chewing and chewing. Then they swallow it. In their mind, these ruminating animals think that it'll taste better if they regurgitate it and start chewing it some more. So they regurgitate it and they keep chewing. They call this cud. I just learned about this word this past week, C-U-D. It's called the cud. And they will keep chewing and chewing. Then they'll swallow it again, thinking that it's going to taste better the third time. And they keep doing that over and over again. In psychology, we call a fixation of thoughts ruminating. We are ruminating. It's interesting that the Bible, 500 times, God calls us sheep. And maybe, just maybe, one of the reasons why is we do a lot of ruminating. We think and we fixate ourselves on a thought, most often a negative thought. We digest it, only to fixate it again and start thinking about it more, thinking that if I just think about it again, it'll allow me to kind of solve that problem. Over and over again. And the Bible, friends, warns us. It says, be careful and take captive every thought and make it obedient to Christ. In other words, if God would not think it, you shouldn't think it. If God would not say that over you, then you don't need to be saying it over you. We're not listening to the right voices. Here's number 2. We also are not living in balance. For many of us, we are literally exhausted. We are so tired. And many of us, if you ask the question, hey, how you doing? Just so busy, just so tired, going from one thing to the next. Look at me, everyone. The devil will always speak the loudest when you are the tiredest. When you are tired, you will compromise more. You'll be impatient. Your emotions will be compromised. You will find yourself causing yourself to sin more. And what I'm encouraging you all is stop living this world that the world's telling us to put this badge that, oh, I'm just so busy. No, we need to slow down and enjoy all that God gives us. I've told this to you before. Slow down, slow the pace to enjoy all of the gifts of God's grace. You know, sometimes when I was doing youth ministry back in Boston, before I moved to Jacksonville, I did youth work at a church up in Boston. And when we do youth work up there, you wouldn't go and do an event at the end of the year at the beach, because in Boston, you just didn't go to the beach unless it was in the summertime. So we like to enjoy ourselves by going skiing. And we would go skiing. That was our winter trip. And I'll never forget when the first times that I went skiing, I'm not going to tell you how I skied and how many accidents I caused and how hurt I got. That's a whole different sermon. But I will tell you that when I was skiing, I'll never forget, I was asking one of the men that was there, that is like one of the EMTs, like a paramedic that's there on those ski slopes. I asked him, when do most of the accidents happen? He said, most of the accidents on the ski slope happen in the afternoon. I said, why? He says, well, oftentimes they run into trees. I said, well, can't they just go to a different direction? Like, why don't they go in the middle? Why do they have to go fall against the trees? He said to me this. He said, they get tired and they get confident. I thought to myself, how often we are like that. When we get tired, we make mistakes. I asked an EMT recently about this. I said, when do most accidents happen? In the morning when people are tired, and when they're coming home, they are tired. Be careful. We need to be still, take our time, slow the pace to enjoy God's grace. Here's number 3. Not listening to the right voice, not living in balance. And number 3 is we're not having the tools. This is one area that many of us are struggling with. Because what happens in life is not predictable. It'd be great if you knew when a loved member, a loved one, or a friend was going to pass away. It'd be great if you knew when something negative was going to happen to you. But life is unpredictable. And so often, when things don't go our way, when something tragic happens in our life, we first go, I'm blaming God. Because we have bought into this lie that God's rescue mission to this planet Earth was to make me happy. Like you'll hear yourselves telling yourselves this, I just want my kids to be happy. And that's great, but that's not God's mission for your children. That's not God's mission for you. God's mission was not for you to be happy on this earth. God's mission was that you would experience eternal joy in the kingdom of heaven. That's God's rescue plan for all of us. And when you have difficulties, remember what God said before he went to the cross. He said, everyone, be careful, take heart, because you will face a dark day. You will have a dark season. And I'm encouraging all of us to remember that. But then he adds to this statement, this beautiful verse in the Gospel of John. He says, but take heart, because I've already overcome this world. God's already done all that we needed him to do. And here's number 4. We don't listen to the right voice. We're not living in balance. For many of us, we're allowing ourselves to just simply allow the balance of life, the way that life is treating us, to kind of get us off track. And here's the final one, is that we're not wanting to be around people. Most depressed people, or people that are experiencing depression, and may not even admit it, by the way, love to be by themselves. They love to just simply be, they could even be in a room full of people, but they will emotionally withdraw. They'll simply just stay by themselves. And I want you to know that the very first problem in the Bible, in the Old Testament, was not a sin. It was solitude. It was how Adam and Eve chose to be by themselves. And I want to encourage all of you. In the book of Romans, chapter 12, verses 5, it says this: you were never intended to be alone. He says, be careful, don't allow yourselves to be alone, because you're a part of one body, one member. and that we all need each other. One of the main reasons why I always use the word family when referring to all of you is not because it's just a nice thing to say that we're all just family. It's because we are family. And if you're going through a difficult time in your life now or will be, lean on the family. Lean on your priest. Lean on those of us that are around you to guide you through that. I'll leave you with this thought. I want you to imagine something. Just simply imagine this. This is totally an imagination, so children, do not get scared or worried about this, but this is simply an imagination. I have some inside information. Someone has got a key to your house, and they're coming tonight. And when you're asleep at night, he's coming in. And everything that you feel is precious to you, he's taking. Everything that you feel is important in your life, he's taking with him. He's coming tonight. If that was true, what would you do? Some of you would maybe, maybe introduce them to two friends of yours called Smith and Wesson. I'm not condoning that at all, but simply saying that maybe some of you may do that. But no matter what you would do, you would be prepared. And you dads, you know what I'm talking about. You would do everything that you could to protect that house. Because no one who's not invited into my house is going to walk through the doors of my house. And Christ says this to us. Be alert, everyone. Be alert. Because the devil, the enemy, is on the prowl, looking for someone to walk in their house and devour. And some of you may say, Father Nick, that's just all only wives tell us. Those are not really true. The devil doesn't really exist. Listen to me, everyone. Whether you believe in him or not doesn't make him go away. You can't close your eyes and say, oh, he's just not there, and he goes away. We are battling a spiritual warfare, and depression is one of the ways. And I'm encouraging you all to remember that that lion doesn't come out and say, hey, gazelle, here I am. I'm coming to devour you. No, he prowls. It's interesting how a lion's color is that of grass. Why? Because he blends in. So you work hard, no problem. I'll tire you out. Listen to those wrong voices. Just keep on doing that. I'll get what I need from you. Stay by yourself. It's okay. Stay by yourself. I'll keep letting you do that. You don't have the tools to deal with that difficult season. Don't worry. I'll give you a way to deal with it through drugs and alcohol. Don't worry about it. I'll find a way for you to stay addicted. And many of us need to remember that we need to change the locks tonight. And I'm encouraging all of you to go out today and to remember this. Don't allow yourselves to listen to those wrong voices. Stop using the wrong tools to get through your difficulty. Don't be by yourself in your depression. And don't live a life that's imbalanced. Because God doesn't want us to fake it, to make it. He wants you to give it to him so that he could take your depression away. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.